Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Israel's most visible proxy in Gaza is dead.
The man seen at the heart of efforts to establish anti-Hamas forces, Popular Forces leader Yasser Abu Shabab, was killed. The Popular Forces did not say who killed him.
Yasser Abu Shabab tried to sell his group as a nationalist force against Hamas. So what does his death reveal about Israel's strategy to reshape power in Gaza? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you want us to do next. Or if you're on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, tell us where you're listening from, and give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It really does help the show.
I'm Mohannad Shehada. I'm a visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, a Palestinian Gazan writer and analyst, and I'm currently joining from Cotswold in the United Kingdom.
So, Mohammed, welcome to The Take. Today, we are talking about Yasser Abu Shabab, the Israeli-backed militia leader who was killed last week in southern Gaza. Now, our listeners might not be familiar with him, but Palestinians are, and he was notorious. And one of the ways we know that is because social media absolutely exploded upon the news of his death. In Gaza, people were seen celebrating, they were handing out sweets. Whereas in Israeli circles, his death was seen as a setback. So to start us off, who was Yasser Abu Shabab, and why did his death provoke such strong reactions?
Well, Yasser Abu Shabab, he served the Israeli agenda on multiple levels. The first one is being the perfect poster boy for an Israeli propaganda campaign about what they kept claiming to be a de-radicalized Palestinian group that is willing to coexist with Israel. And Israel has been using the contrast between Yasser Abu Shabab's group of less than 200 people with the rest of the Gazan population to deny genocide or atrocities in Gaza, to keep telling Americans, look, there is a Palestinian group that we are treating nicely, giving food, water, vehicles, phones, money, luxury to. And those are the Palestinians we treat well because they are de-radicalized in opposition to the rest of the population that is still undergoing this process. So it was basically the Israeli contrast of using Abu Shabab as a facade to cover up atrocities, to cover up genocide. The Israeli original use was to use them to loot aid, humanitarian aid that was going into Gaza, food, water, medicine, etc., so systematically, to the extent that at points the UN was saying that about 90% of its aid convoys were being intercepted by the gangs before reaching distribution points.
Wow.
It was very obvious because from May 2024, that's when Israel started the invasion of Rafah against the orders explicitly from the International Court of Justice not to carry out that invasion. But from that very moment, May 2024, that's when the gang immediately appears as soon as Israel takes over. Yeah. And that's when the name Abu Shabab starts resonating around Gaza, first as rumors, then confirmed actor, and then the main culprit behind the looting. To the extent that the UN named him personally in an internal memo in November 2024 as the main culprit behind the looting. And that's where we see those gangs looting aid, oftentimes about 100 meters away from Israeli tanks and soldiers who never intervened unless local volunteers or policemen tried to prevent the looting. That's when Israel would bomb them.
So I want to ask you about his rise to power. He wasn't a tribal elder or a political leader. He was a convicted drug trafficker who, prior to October 7th, 2023, was actually locked up inside of a Hamas-run prison. So help us sketch out his biography a little bit, his early life, his criminal background, and how he would go on to lead this militia that was backed by the Israeli military.
He was quite a very young man. He was born in the 90s and he was uneducated. He dropped out of elementary school, yet somehow wrote an article in fluent English in the Wall Street Journal, allegedly. The article was under his name. We never learned how it got published there. The rest of his character, he was uncharismatic, didn't have much story about him, nothing of any depth or sophistication. He was a petty criminal, a drug dealer, that had solid links to ISIS in Sinai to facilitate the smuggling into Gaza. And he was apprehended by the police in 2015, sentenced to, I think, 25 years in prison, He spent 8 years of that sentence and then ran away. I heard from multiple local sources that he was married to 2 women in Gaza. I'm not sure what they found attractive about him, but one of them decided to move in with him in that Rafah area that Israel designated for the gang. They couldn't get anyone to collaborate except for the lowest of the lowest, the criminals that are on the run from authorities that escaped prison after October 7th. So they found Abu Shabab, they found his deputy Ghassan Haney, who was an ISIS commander in Rafah. They found another deputy, Hassam Nabahin, another ISIS commander that fought against the Egyptian army in Egypt. They grouped this gang artificially, the Israelis. They would recruit people as collaborators. There was a group of people that were in the same predicament as Netanyahu, criminals on the run from authorities who understood that if the genocide in Gaza is over, they would have to face trial and face justice. So they had an interest in keeping it running. At some point, Hamas managed to ambush Abu Shabab's brother, Fathi. They killed him in Deir al-Balah in November 2024 with 21 members of the gang. And that's when the Israelis said, okay, Abu Shabab now has a personal vendetta against Hamas, so we're going to use that and turn him into a mercenary, not just a petty criminal. And that's when the Israelis recruited him as a collaborator.
It really is remarkable, some of the things you're saying, especially his stated links to ISIL in Sinai. Clearly, the Israelis were attached to this idea. Do we know if the Americans were aware of all of this and they were signing off explicitly?
Well, Israel has been trying systematically to persuade the Americans to work with Abu Shabab and the other gangs. There's a couple of other gangs that Israel cultivated and created, all of them led by criminals, fugitives, outlaws, murderers, ISIS members, etc. The same kind of crowd. And the Israelis have been doing this sort of charm offensive in Washington. So, for example, I know a CEO of an American think tank in Washington who went to Israel, and then the IDF and the Israeli government gave her a propaganda talk in which they tried to portray Abu Shabab as an organic, grassroots civil society activist.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he understood what any of those words meant, but that's how the Israelis were trying to portray him. And they were saying, here is a hero of peace, coexistence, who appreciates and understands Jewish history. I don't think he knew Palestinian history at all. He dropped out of elementary school. So basically, the Americans were at times fooled by this. They thought, okay, this gang might be a solid thing. But when the media campaign uncovered the connections between Israel and the gang, particularly when Avigdor Lieberman, the Israeli defense minister, said on a podcast accidentally, he revealed that Netanyahu has been arming, funding, sheltering, financing ISIS in Gaza.
Because what did Lieberman leak? What did he publish? On the advice of security officials, we activated clans in Gaza that oppose Hamas. What's bad about that? That's only good.
They dressed Abu Shabab up and his gang members in Palestinian police uniforms. They got them tactical gear. They got them brand new weapons, vehicles, etc. And they put a Palestinian insignia and logos all over their uniform to give an insinuation that those were legitimate authority that were accepted by Gazans. The Americans allowed them to run with this experiment for some time.
I've heard that the Israelis were genuinely surprised that he was failing to win public legitimacy amongst the Palestinians. But when you lay it all out, you see this sophisticated social media operation that he's saying all the right things, like actually things that Wall Street Journal readers want to hear, that he's anti-Hamas, he's nationalist, he's protecting aid. It seems so obvious in hindsight. So let's talk about his death. Abu Shabab was killed inside what Israel calls the Yellow Line, which is supposedly a secure Israeli-controlled zone in Rafah. Now, the circumstances of his death are murky. Some reports say it was an internal clash. Others say he was beaten to death over his collaboration with Israel. Now, Hamas called him a traitor, but didn't explicitly claim responsibility. So, small question is, what are you hearing generally about his death? And big picture, what do you think it tells us about Hamas's hold on power in Gaza right now?
Well, the confirmed information that I have is that he was killed by someone from within the gang called Mahmoud Abu Slayma. It's a small clan in eastern Rafah, in the same area where Abu Shabab operated. They come from the same tribe, Tarabian. And Tarabin is a tribe that extends over Gaza, Sinai, the Negev inside Israel, and Jordan. It's a giant tribe.
What can this tell us about Hamas's hold on power in Gaza right now?
Well, Hamas is basically filling up the vacuum that Israel created. So Israel had the clear goal of taking Hamas out of government and dismantling it as a group, as a militant group. But at the same time, Netanyahu never offered an alternative, mainly because he never wanted to have a day after plan for Gaza, because he didn't want Gaza to exist on the day after. It was very deliberate. So with the vacuum that Israel left behind, Hamas only found it intuitive to fill it up with its security forces, militants, etc. Of course, they are heavily beaten and significantly diminished compared to pre-October 7th, but they managed to take over Gaza within days as soon as the ceasefire was announced. Israel had been cultivating other gangs inside Gaza that Hamas went up against immediately as soon as the ceasefire started. That's how they turned them into a cautionary tale that sort of frightened other gangs and other clans and families to turn themselves in or to hand over their weapons or to cooperate with the security authorities or with Hamas in Gaza. At the same time, Hamas has been saying that they are willing to step down from government, hand over the governance in Gaza from A to Z to an administrative committee, including the police force. But Netanyahu has been doing everything possible to prevent that from happening and to keep Hamas in power. So with the administrative committee, the names of the 15 members of that committee have been on Netanyahu's desk and Trump's desk for over a month and a half by now. We never got any answer about it. The police force, there was a Palestinian Authority police force that was trained in Egypt and Jordan. They were supposed to come into Gaza. It even says so in the Trump plan. Netanyahu rejected it out of hand when the Egyptian chief of intelligence proposed it to him recently. So you're seeing on the one hand this sort of flexibility on the Palestinian side, but Netanyahu trying to do everything possible to keep Hamas in power, to use them as a pretext to continue the genocide by attritional forms.
More with Mohammed after the break. So the case of Yasser Abu Shabab is part of a much larger phenomenon. There are many examples of Israel arming and protecting criminal gangs in Gaza. These are gangs that steal humanitarian aid and make life even harder for the people living under this genocide. I can understand what Israel could hope to achieve building a network of support backing these militias. But what about for the militia leaders themselves? What's in it for them? And do you think that Shabab's death might change the calculus for these other gang leaders now?
For those other gang leaders, it's basically a lot of them are fugitives, criminals on the run from authority. So the Israelis would offer them a second chance, coupled with a promise of power, luxury, finance, becoming the rulers of Gaza, and as well as an ultimate promise of protection. The Israeli army tried to assure them of their personal safety and protection. Repeatedly, they went to a great length, including the IDF intervening by military force, either Israeli tanks and soldiers or Israeli drones and fighter jets intervening to protect Abu Shabab and his gang. So that's the bargain that the Israelis put on the table. With the killing of Abu Shabab by one of his own people, it destroys that dynamic completely, because now the Israeli assurances of safety are worth nothing. It's basically for the gang leaders, anything that Israel gives them at the moment, money, food, water, luxuries, drugs, whatever the Israelis would provide, is merely the last meal before a death sentence. Because now the understanding is clear. If you continue to collaborate with Israel, someone within your gang might rise up and kill you. And even as a gang leader, you're living surrounded by ticking bombs. Every single member of the gang is not there because of ideology. So at any moment, any of them can develop a guilty conscience, feel shame, and then decide as an act of repentance to kill the gang leader or to turn himself in to flee to West Gaza and turn himself in, hoping for clemency. We've seen this with the Abu Shabab gang. After his death, multiple gang members fled to West Gaza and turned themselves in and are now cooperating with security authorities.
Listening to this makes you realize that Hamas has been playing a very crucial role. I mean, say what you want about Hamas, but without that security presence, that unifying force, you're talking about gang warfare. You're talking about dividing up Gaza into different quadrants and having people battle it out. I mean, it's like a failed state, something like what's happening in Haiti right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The Israeli vision for Gaza was to cause societal collapse by every means possible. That was one of the sort of genocidal tactics in there. Starvation served the goal of pinning Palestinians against each other, but also the IDF going and recruiting families or recruiting clans or tribes or gangs, etc. Or at least sometimes the IDF would provide weapons to gangs without any strings attached, without collaborating. You just have these weapons and they expect them to rise up against Hamas or rise up against each other. So there was a turf war going on. So at some point, like last year, I was talking to family, friends in Gaza. They were saying when they leave home to look for food, they would never take any money. They would never take any mobile devices or any valuables because you can get killed over a phone. You can get killed over a few hundred shekels of cash. It was so ugly and brutal. Some of those gangs or even individual criminals would set up checkpoints randomly and they would kill children just to take away bags of wheat flour or the little food that they managed to get their hands on. So that was the Israeli vision for Gaza, is that Gaza would destroy itself from within with Israel's help engineering the circumstances for this. At the same time, the Israelis never understood the lesson that was given to them over and over and over again, which is you cannot defeat Hamas militarily. The most authoritative study on groups like Hamas was carried out by the RAND Corporation in 2008, non-state armed actors. It was called How Terrorist Groups End. And they looked at 268 groups like Hamas. They found that only 7% were destroyed militarily.
Wow.
Whereas 43% were dismantled through a political process, dialogue. And that's exactly the place where we at. Trump understood that, okay, you can dismantle Hamas through some sort of accommodation, a peace agreement that offers Gaza a genuine horizon. And even with dismantling Hamas, the talk is about dismantling the offensive capabilities, rockets, tunnels, production sites, but not the defensive capabilities that Hamas could use to maintain an insurgency against the IDF inside Gaza. So we're seeing this flexibility.
Wow.
In Trump's circles. I think the United Kingdom as well made a similar comparison to Northern Ireland. But on Netanyahu's side, he's doing everything possible to still claim that destroying Hamas completely is possible. And at the same time, to keep them in power, to prevent them from stepping down, to use it as an excuse to destroy Gaza.
That's a perfect transition to my final question. Hovering over all of this is the so-called ceasefire. Israel reportedly planned to use Abu Shabab's organization to secure reconstruction projects that would fall under the next phase of the U.S.-backed plan for Gaza. Now he's dead. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is closed, and a lasting peace seems as elusive as ever. Do you think that Abu Shabab's death has really scrambled Israel's post-war plans? And if so, what does it tell you that a man like this was ever part of those plans in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Abu Shabab's death destroyed Israel's not post-war plans. They were still in a state of war. They're still in a state of war at the moment. But Abu Shabab's death destroyed Israel's reconfiguration of war plans. So when Israel was talking about reconstruction, they still, until this moment, want to prevent any reconstruction whatsoever from happening in Gaza. They came up with a concept that they borrowed from Myanmar. What happened in there is that the Burmese government established what they call 2 model villages. It was basically dwellings that can fit at most in both villages. It would fit 314 families. It did not have any bathrooms, any kitchens, any transport system, any communal kitchens, any shared spaces. So it was there to accommodate 314 families out of 1.2 million Rohingyas that were kicked out, ethnically cleansed into Bangladesh. And the Israelis have the exact same idea with this new Rafah.
Yeah.
It's basically a Potemkin village, a facade, where you pretend to do reconstruction to absolve yourself from blame for denying reconstruction in the rest of Gaza. So that's how Israel developed the concept of New Rafah. It was supposed to be this very tiny area that is controlled by the IDF, run by the Abu Shabab gang, where Israel would allow it a little more reconstruction. What that meant, it didn't mean building any actual homes, because the IDF until this very moment is still destroying homes in that very area where reconstruction is supposed to take place. So they were talking about providing shipping containers that would be repurposed as shelters without any kitchens, without any bathrooms, infrastructure, transport systems, so they're not fit for human habitation. But the Israelis were saying we would move some people there in the thousands. You have 2 million people in Gaza. The Israelis at best were talking about thousands moving in there. and that Israel would keep taking pictures, videos of that Potemkin village to tell the international community, look, we're not preventing reconstruction in Gaza, we're only preventing it in the Hamas-controlled side. Here's a de-radicalized pro-coexistence, pro-peace area where we are allowing them a second chance. At the same time, Israel, with this new Rafah plan, they came up with two clear conditions. Anyone moving into the camp would be vetted by Israeli security agencies, the IDF, so they would pick and choose which people would be let in, and anyone moving in there would not be allowed back to Gaza. They would lose all contact with their families, but they would be given the choice of leaving Gaza to Egypt and beyond. It was a transit camp, a concentration camp for people to be expelled. So that was the idea. With Abu Shabab being gone out of the picture, that will begin to crumble as well. He was the perfect poster boy for this. There was even a pro-Israeli lobbying group in Washington that was regularly posting videos of Abu Shabab and his wife, and they were calling his wife the first lady of Rafah. And they had big plans for him. It all crumbled after his death.
Wow. This conversation feels new. It feels different. I mean, this war for so long was stuck in the same parallel. It was bombs coming from the sky, covering the genocide, seeing the destruction. This feels like we're talking about the next phase, which is in some ways going to be just as awful, but different. It's going to be about who's ruling, who has power, armed gangs, proxies. I think that this is a really important story, Mohannad, and I think we're going to be talking about the implications of this for a long time. Thank you for coming on The Take.
Thanks so much for having me.